at the end of the day, I still want to be able I don't dislike George Washington. I don't dislike even some of the most racist people in history. But I want to know their history, but I also want to know not only that, you know, hey, they were whatever, but I also want to know about the Shirley Chisholms. I also want to know about the Frederick Douglasses. And not even Nat Turner. I want to know more about Nat Turner than him just being some revolutionary. I want to know the Nat Turner that was out in the fields. I want to know the Nat Turner that grew up as a kid. I don't want to know just the narrative. You know, tuned in to Urban Conservative. 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 Tuned in to Urban Conservative.
Q9, my futon, fold it up and smoke it. Transgression, a progression of a war we ain't asked for. Transgression, a progression of a war we ain't asked for. It's madness, yo. All the things that we could talk about.
Call it.
But let's talk about these urban circumstances real quick.
And basically, it's
we got this.
So,
Revolution.
winner of frosty hand. Muhammad is the fame's name, forever stand.
Standing on royal fusing of justice for the few, ridiculed by the pale terrorists, bent on genocidal obsession, rooted in fear of neglection and abandonment, fueled by nightmares of ancestors' jealousy. Because at the end of the day, I still want to be able to I don't dislike George Washington. The kind of friends I think our friends should be like my friends. My friends are the kind of friends I think everyone needs. My friends see the things at times I don't see. My friends hate the police.
What has changed?
Are deemed the criminals, and the blacks are deemed the criminals.
Shut up and help.
Reflection ain't nothing but the inner child trying to see you. You gonna look? You gonna pick up that book?
Lord, keep me far from the faith. Guide me through night and day. Teach me your ways. Show me the righteous way to sway. Lord, can you teach me, please? Show me the way, I'd say. Grand Risings, and welcome back to another episode of the Urban Conservative with Chaz Neal. How's everybody doing today? It's Monday, getting into it, a good week. And definitely a good week. I want to get into, Juneteenth is coming up, and I see so much. It's crazy because, so in Rochester, the NAACP is hosting, and there's some other people, they're putting on events for Juneteenth, and they're using the RGB colors. So I've reached out to them privately, and haven't really got no kind of response. So I took them to social media to, call out the NAACP, and it's like, teach history, because they're leaving out so much when it comes to Juneteenth, and it's sad because I feel like, well, I shouldn't even feel like they are erasing Black Americans, our history. And I don't even think a lot of people understand or even get the concept of why, right? And honestly, you know, I feel like there's different reasons. I feel like one, there's a push for reparations, and a big push, um, and as well for accountability. I think it's, a lot of people are tired of injustice. They're tired of being mistreated, and we always hear that, the language of the unheard is a riot. But we need to turn that into a revolution, something that is going to sustain future generations, not something that is going to go on for a couple of months or a couple of years. We need something that is going to last, like this brainwashing, that this miseducation of the Negro has gone on for so long. We need this to go forward for generations. So that same shit that they've done to us, that brainwashing that they did to our ancestors, the brainwashing that they are doing in the public school systems, this is why we don't get anywhere. People need to pay attention to that. And that's why I wanted to talk about the history of Juneteenth, because I feel like there is a lot that is not being discussed. So I found a couple of videos that I'm going to play today. One is something that, I don't know if I might play three, might only play two. But this one I definitely want to play, because it's very informative, and no, that's the second video I want to play, and that's the one I was going to play. So going to play, whoops, actually, nope, I want full screen, theater, full screen. So literally are going to watch this video, and we're going to talk about moments in Juneteenth and the truth about Abraham Lincoln, because I think people feel like, I'm just gonna get into it because the way I perceive it and maybe the way other people might perceive it might be different. So let me just get into it.
Episode 6. This is Black History Moments, a podcast dedicated to telling the stories of those who have been forgotten or who are lesser known in our history. But this episode is a little bit different. Instead of learning about a specific person, this is the story of Juneteenth, formerly known as Jubilee Day. Former enslaved people and their descendants began celebrating June 19th as the day signifying their emancipation or freedom after the Civil War. But did you know that although Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he didn't really want to free enslaved people? Keep listening to find out the story of Juneteenth right after this break. So to start, I do understand that I am a bit late to the party when it comes to Juneteenth. My plan was to have this episode up on Juneteenth, but life happens, so here we are. I figured that it's better to still do the podcast episode on it because it is extremely important for us to understand the importance of Juneteenth and why it is so important to the African American and Black community here in the United States. But to understand how Juneteenth came to be, we must first have just a quick little review of the Civil War. Don't worry, I promise I will try my best not to bore you with it like your middle school history teachers. It'll be quick. So the Civil War began in 1861 between northern and southern states in the United States. But before the war began, tensions were peaking in the U.S. between the North and the South. In the North, there was a growing concern and opposition to slavery, but Southerners felt otherwise. In the South, their economy depended on enslaved people to harvest their crops, especially tobacco and cotton. So they felt that their livelihoods were at risk with this new opposition to slavery coming from people in the North. Boom. So when Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, 7 of the southern states withdrew and formed what was called at the time the Confederate States of America. Those states included South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Texas. Texas is extremely important to remember in this podcast episode. So keep Texas in mind. These states withdrew from the US because they felt that Lincoln's new presidency was just like it was the last straw in these tensions that had already been building amongst them, and they were already high due to the North and the South's differing views on slavery. So later on, 4 more states joined the Confederacy, and those states were Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And so the war began, and that war is known as the deadliest war ever fought on American soil. So there is our recap of the Civil War. I promised you it wouldn't be long. So on September 22nd, 1862, Lincoln issued what was a preliminary Emancipation Proclamation. And this determined that on January 1st of the following year, 1863, all enslaved people in the states that had rebelled would then be free. However, this only applied to those 11 states. The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to the states of the Confederacy. But what people don't know, a lot of people don't know, is that there were border states that remained a part of the Union who didn't split off with the Confederacy and join forces with them. And some of those border states that were still a part of the Union also still had people that were enslaved as well. So those people were not a part of the individuals being addressed in the Emancipation Proclamation. And although the general belief is that Abraham Lincoln was against the concept of slavery and therefore a supporter of Black people, that isn't exactly true. In a speech Lincoln gave in Charleston, Illinois on September 1858, he said, quote, "While I was at the hotel today, an elderly gentleman called upon me to know whether I was really in favor of producing a perfect equality between the Negroes and white people. While I had not proposed to myself on this occasion to say much on that subject, yet as the question was asked me, I thought I will occupy perhaps 5 minutes in saying something in regard to it. I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the Black and white races. That I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor of qualifying them hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say, in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and Black races, which I believe will forever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and I, as much as any other of her man, am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race." End quote. And that is from Abraham Lincoln's mouth, September 18th, 1858, in a speech he gave in Illinois. So a common misconception, and I will admit that even when I was in school, when we were taught about the Emancipation Proclamation, I mean, thankfully, I did have a breakthrough around middle school where I was told the truth about Lincoln's views in regards to Black and white race relations in America. Early on, a lot of children are taught in school that Abraham Lincoln was our savior. He was someone who gave us freedom. He was someone who believed in us and just wanted to set all enslaved people free. But this was not the case. Abraham Lincoln did not feel like we were equal. He did not feel like we would ever be equal, and that we were not even deserving enough to hold office or vote or be jurors here in the United States. So here is the real deal when it came to Abraham Lincoln and the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was a direct result of the backlash of the Confederate States. Because the Confederate States did not want to get rid of slavery and they did not want to set their enslaved people free, Abraham Lincoln felt like the Emancipation Proclamation was a direct hit to them for rebelling against the Union. And that is the truth about the Emancipation Proclamation. So during this time, all of this is happening, and you have the Civil War going on, and the root of the Civil War was this. It was slavery. It was about money. It was about their livelihoods. And they knew that if they had to let enslaved people go, it was going to hinder their pockets, their farms, their tobacco fields, and their cotton fields. That's it. So you may be wondering, if the Emancipation Proclamation was to take place January 1st of 1863, what is the importance of Juneteenth? Why do we celebrate Juneteenth as our freedom? Well, although the Emancipation Proclamation was to take place and go into effect January 1st, 1863, it wasn't until 1865, in April, it was actually April 9th, 1865, when General Lee surrendered in the Civil War. He surrendered and gave up in Virginia. Now, the Emancipation Proclamation had gone into effect for some enslaved people, but during this time, a lot of slave owners, people who owned slaves in the South, in those states that were belonging to the Confederacy now, moved. They moved their families, they moved the people that they owned to Texas because they felt that there weren't as many Union troops in Texas as there had been in the other states of the Confederacy. So they just packed up and moved to Texas, and there were so many enslaved people there. It was crazy. So after General Lee gave up 1865, keep in mind, this is 2 whole years after enslaved people were technically set free, right? They're free to go. But keep in mind, this is the 1800s. People don't have cell phones. They don't have email. They don't have kite to send a note. There's no form of communication that these enslaved people had to be able to communicate with one another and say, hey, we're free. You are free to go. You can leave. You are no longer under the control of your masters or your owners or anything like that. You are now freed people. We didn't have that back then. So 2 whole years later, here we go. We come in, and there is a general that comes in, and he holds this huge meeting, I guess you can call it, in the center, right? And he issues General Order number 3. And this is what he said in this order. He says, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. So basically, he was saying that the relationship that you have with one another is no longer owner and property. The relationship now legally is employer and employed. So you have to pay them. They are no longer your property. You don't own them. You have to pay them. And the reactions were insane. You had, from one spectrum to another, you had some people that were enslaved.
So I want to stop right there, because they I don't think people fully understand what the significance of June 19th actually is. It's the same thing as July 4th for our ancestors, because there was, and I know there's a lot of people that won't fully understand this, fully comprehend it, but when the Constitution was originally written, there was the 3/5 compromise, right? And we weren't a person. We weren't African Americans, Black Americans. We weren't considered in the Constitution. We are written as an amendment. And it's, people just don't want to bless up, bro, bless up. And people just don't want to face that fact. Because it does bug me, and I'm glad that there is people that want to educate about Juneteenth and not just give, because I'll tell you right now, as being a 47-year-old man, I've never seen so many Juneteenth events that are sponsored by city entities, because it was never like that before until like 4 or 5 years ago. It was never like that. And when you look back and you see videos or footage, from back then, you see American flags, you see the red, white, and blue, because that meant something. And that's what I don't think people honestly, they don't understand. And then you see these colors, the RGB, right? Red, green, black, right? Which does have significance to the Black American history, right? But not until later on, because that's what a lot of people don't understand is when we wave those colors, that ideology didn't even come around until Marcus Garvey. That a lot of things that is going on is Pan-Africanism, right? And I don't think people fully understand that either, because it's about, and that's what trips me out, because it makes me wonder why all of a sudden would they use these colors and then try to, but see, they don't bring up Marcus Garvey though. And I understand why they want to use that, his movement, that color and that Pan-Africanism, but they want to take out certain parts because he was a separationist, right? He wanted this, just like Malcolm. He wanted, and that's what people don't understand, right? And then you see what cities, certain cities, I will say this because certain cities just would choose to ignore the history, and because they have Nigerians, like Rochester, who work for Mayo Clinic, um, and it blows my mind because, and then you have Black community leaders that stand behind that, and it's like, for what? But people will never understand that you will never bite the hand that feeds you, and you will never bite the hand that frees you. So, um, I'm just, hey, I'm just speaking out truth, and that's why a lot of our community leaders don't speak out, because one, they will not bite the hand that feeds them, or they won't bite the hand that freed them. Y'all, because I'm telling you right now, y'all got to start making this shit make sense to me, because of why we have such chaos in our community and why we don't get anywhere. But yet we have these politicians come out talking about crimes down, murders are down. But then tell me how, when you can show data and statistics and it's up, but then they'll be like, oh, well, no, it's not. You're downplaying the violence in our communities. That's what I don't understand. When are we going to stand up and start going to city council meetings? I just had a conversation with in Red Wing the other day on Saturday with Mike. I don't know if Mike's still on there, and Thomas Young. And that's one thing that Thomas said is like, nobody ever comes to the city council meetings. It's the same thing in Minneapolis. Black people we don't show up. The state capitol, we don't show up. You know who does show up? The sheep, the paid community leaders who say they're getting justice in our communities when we don't see any justice. We don't see an accountability. What I do see is a bunch of pandering. And then when you try to have these conversations in private, and they just try to ignore you, then you bring it public and then they want to block you. Well, we could have had this in private, but y'all say that, oh, I'm intimidating, or I'm this, I'm that. Why is the truth intimidating? I will never understand that. I don't know how many times I've dealt with this with Black men in community leadership, right? From Keith Ellison. And I think a lot of it, he got short man syndrome. So anybody taller than him, he feels like they're inferior to him, that they're stronger, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Buddy, we're all human beings, bro. I could give a fuck. Because it's not about the you don't have to be strong to knock a motherfucker out. You don't gotta be strong. And that's why I'm not scared of nothing. I don't give a fuck if you 6'8", 6'9". You bleed just like I bleed. You bleed just like I bleed. You bleed just like I bleed. But I'll tell you this, it's going to be a crazy ass summer because the truth is going to be exposed. I'm going to tell you right now, the truth is going to be exposed. Because I'll tell you right now, these people are selected. Just like I can tell you right now who's going to win the Red Wing mayor race. I can tell you right now. I can call that out. And the only reason they're going to win for one reason. One reason, popularity. It's not because of policy. It's not because she's good for the people. Because if she was good for the people, people would honestly do their research and look up her history at Red Wing Public Schools. Look how she is at Red Wing Public School meetings. Would you honestly want a mayor like that who does not pay attention? Who, when stuff is being talked about, ignores or turns off her camera because she's uncomfortable about certain conversations, or when just doesn't want to be there because she doesn't want to be there? That's the kind of mayor y'all want in Red Wing. People really need to think, because elections have consequences. We got to stop voting for popularity and actually vote for people who are going to do for our communities. Because when has she ever read the red alarm in Red Wing? Her own community gets fucked over in Red Wing at the public schools. And yet, you see articles all the time at the Republican Eagle about the bad grades that the Native American kids are getting at Red Wing public schools, are the fucked up educational. And yet, that's never talked about beyond the Republican Eagle. Because when you bring it up in certain groups, you get blocked. Nobody ever just wants to just talk about facts. Because they put, the crazy thing of it is, they're the ones that keep the data. They're the ones that keep the data. But yet, we don't ever say nothing. When are people going to stand up? And I'm glad that there is people out there that do want to teach the truth. Because I'm not saying that RGB does not have a place in Juneteenth, because it does. But what you people have to understand too is that our history, we don't know where it leads back to in Africa. We don't know. And what's crazy is, even when you take these 23andMe shit, 23 and whatever that fucking shit is called, right? She comes up with a bunch of countries in Africa. There's no direct we just know Africa. We don't know what really, because I know mine, there was West Africa, there was South Africa, Cameroon, and I'm like, whoa, that's a lot. So to be at the end of the day, there's a lot. All I know is that my peoples, my ancestors, the Neils, my grandpa's people came in South Carolina. I know where, you know what I'm saying? I don't know Africa. I know America. That's why I have such a problem now today being called an African American, because at the end of the day, I don't know Africa. I know what y'all have told me. And it's not the truth. Y'all put out there that, because all of Africa is not these kids over there starving and got flies all around them. It's not. That's not how Africa is. Africa is a beautiful country. But a lot of us Black Americans, we don't have no correlation to there. You know who does? Immigrants. People that migrated from Africa to here. So that's why you have that Pan-Africanism, because they want us, just like Marcus Garvey wanted to do, was to unite Blacks all across the world. But he wanted us to unite in Africa, not in America, in Africa. So that's why I don't consider that it's a part of Juneteenth, right? It should be, because it's a part of Black history, but it's not something that we should be sitting there celebrating, because the way that they're doing it is not the way that that movement was. It was to build wealth for the Black community and take that to Africa. That's why he built the trains, the boats, the trucking services. It was about building Black wealth. They don't ever teach that. They don't teach the things that he was trying to do for the Blacks. They just take one certain part of it. They don't take everything else. Because look up Marcus Garvey, look up UNIA. There's some deep, rich history to that shit. And I say this, if people are going to bring up those colors, please bring up the whole history with it. And show what Marcus Garvey was trying to do. Teach the history. But also teach Juneteenth. Teach about the struggles of the Black Americans, what we went through, our ancestors went through. How many people we've lost because they don't want to tell the truth. I think about Emmett Till. I think about George Stinney. I think about Willie Francis, right? Medgar Evers, who was lynched, an NAACP leader. Look up Fred Hampton, Malcolm X, people that were literally slaughtered, the MOVE movement, the Black Panthers. We have been crucified and demonized our whole damn existence in America. And yet we don't want to get even. I know I don't. It's not about revenge, because I can never get that revenge. Never. It's not about that. All I want is my people to be exonerated, is to be celebrated, because at the end of the day, we can't go back and change history, but we can teach the truth so that we don't repeat history, so that our future generations don't have to go through what we went through. Isn't this what's about, leaving future generations in better hands? Because right now, we're not doing that. We're not leaving our future generations in better hands. We're not. We're not. And I don't care if here's what I'm going to say. If you're voting for Biden or Trump, you're not putting your future generations in better hands. You're not. You're not. Our ancestors, and especially if you're Black, you know how many of our ancestors couldn't vote because they were felons? And the fact that you're out here promoting a president with felonies, and we couldn't even, man, listen, I got a motherfucking voter registration fraud charge for something that I didn't even do, that I did correctly. But because I'm a felon, it's a crime. It was a crime then. So yeah, I feel a certain type of way of motherfuckers talking about they voting for Trump. Because it really bugs me when just 2 years ago, felons in Minnesota couldn't even vote. Our voice was silenced. And then the crazy thing, I went and filled it out correctly, the paper, but somehow somebody put one online in, which I didn't do, and they didn't put on that there was a felon, which I put on I was a felon. Because they're going to look it up. Why would I lie? So it really fucking blew me away, man. But it is what it is. I'm already almost off probation for that anyways. That happened in 2020. That still blows my mind every day. And then I see people out there talking about they're voting for a felon. And it's like, wow, we couldn't even vote as felons 2 years ago. And it just blows my mind. It's like, for him to even compare himself to being a Black American or to be Black, it is beyond ridiculous to me, because he's not like us. He can never be like us. And y'all need to go sit your trick asses down somewhere and shut the fuck up and sit this one out. But I wanted to play the one that I want to play is this one. But this is, I think people are, because this is a man who actually lives from Texas and how they actually celebrate Juneteenth out there, where Juneteenth actually started. So let me be quiet and I will play Juneteenth in the Big Island.
Greetings, one and all. I am Bob the Storyteller, your resident griot or oral historian, and welcome to another episode of Profiles in History. Today we're profiling Juneteenth and the big lie that has shadowed it since its inception. But before we get into that, I have to make a confession to all of you. I might be a bit biased, overly enthusiastic, and slightly partisan when it comes to speaking on Juneteenth, but it's not my fault. You see, I was born in Texas, Central Texas, to be exact. I grew up really hyped about Juneteenth gatherings. If I'm being really honest, I knew very little about the holiday as a child. As a kid, my excitement was over the fact that it was the only day in my life that I got to combine eating cake with drinking soda. Of course, I'm talking about that infamous red velvet cake and strawberry soda pop. It wasn't until my adolescence that I began to gain a deeper understanding of the history and significance of Juneteenth. I find what usually serves as history here in the Americas is actually propagandized mythology, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's jump into what we all have gathered here for, Juneteenth and the big lie. Growing up in Texas, most of our Juneteenth celebrations were usually planned by local churches. Very few were ever secular in nature. The largest ones I ever attended were in Houston, about 3 hours drive southeast of my hometown of Killeen. I used to wonder why we never celebrated in the capital city of Austin, which was only about 40-minute drive from my hometown. But it wasn't until I was about, 12, maybe 13, that I found out that it was a formerly enslaved man everyone called Pastor Yates, who organized the community back in 1872 to purchase land. This land is where we were gathering to celebrate Juneteenth. They named it Emancipation Park. Full disclosure here, I probably could have known this fact much sooner as a child had it not been for my preoccupation with the food and fun of Juneteenth. I don't think I've ever seen in my life seen so much food in one place. Okay, over the decades, those celebrations ebbed and flowed. There were some years when there may have only been a few dozen in attendance, and there were years that we didn't travel to Houston. We had small, very small Juneteenth celebrations at our local church. The mythology surrounding Juneteenth that I later found out was a lie, a big lie. It has to do with the popular narrative that the enslaved in Galveston, Texas, knew nothing about their freedom until General Granger came down from New Orleans on June 19, 1865, and delivered his infamous 5 Orders address. The third order read thusly: the people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freed are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. Okay, I'm going to need y'all to bear with me for a second. I gotta gather myself so I don't say the wrong thing. First of all, Texas was one of the most inhumane, sadistic states in the Confederacy. And yes, the inhumanity heaped on the enslaved has been chronicled extensively. And so I won't need to go into that here. But to believe that enslaved men, women, and children in Galveston were these indolent, ignorant souls not active in their own fight for freedom is beyond delusional. Okay, I might be getting ahead of myself here. Let's just look at the popular narrative surrounding Juneteenth, and you'll see where I'm going. The popular narrative says that Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation January 1, 1863, freeing the enslaved in all treasonous states that had seceded from the Union. By the way, slave states that hadn't seceded, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland, they weren't affected by the Emancipation Proclamation. The institution of slavery remained intact in those states, but that's a topic for another session. Now, back to that distorted history of Black men, women, and children, Galveston not knowing they were free until good old General Granger arrived on the scene. Let's get more of that. This is going to be a bit of a mind twist, but I need y'all to stay with me. Okay, listen with your heart, not your ears. Dig into the core of your humanity and hear me. Human beings do not see themselves as anything but free, living under oppressive conditions. Let me say that again. And please receive what I am saying. Human beings have never and will never see themselves as anything but free, recognizing they are existing under oppressive conditions. The big lie is a tool of propaganda that seeks to strip African Americans of any agency in our struggle for freedom. Eurocentric mythology places the wand-wielding hand of white America over the heads of enslaved with an abracadabra, you're free now, magical incantation. And here's where I have to remind myself to breathe. Give me a second. I am not the first to do battle with the big lie of Black folks as inanimate objects on the sidelines of history waiting for someone to hand us our freedom. In 1935, one of the greatest intellectuals born in this nation, W.B. Du Bois, published a manuscript titled Black Reconstruction in America. In this manuscript, there's an essay, The Propaganda of History. I would highly recommend anyone seeking to right the wrongs of our current mythology read it. But in this piece, Du Bois writes about how the narrative surrounding the participation of Black folks in the Civil War was propagandized in a way that sought to exclude us from our rightful place in conversations of history. He really digs deep into fighting the popular notion of the time that we, Black folks, were not considered human beings. It's really worth a read. Make time for it. But let me be really clear in what I'm saying, and you can quote me here. The truth of the history of this nation is that we, African Americans, freed ourselves and at the same time saved the Union from defeat. This statement shouldn't be controversial because it is a fact supported by overwhelming evidence. The Union was suffering losses at an incredible rate. The Confederacy was quite literally on the verge of destroying the United States. But don't take my word for it. Let me share a little story with you. Abraham Lincoln actually wrote the Emancipation Proclamation around July of 1862 and was ready to push it out to the public. His Secretary of State, William Seward, stopped him. Now, I can see y'all sitting there wondering, why? Well, let me give you an actual quote from Seward to Lincoln. Mr. President, I approve of the proclamation, but I question the expediency of its issue at this juncture. The depression of the public mind consequent upon our repeated reverses is so great that I fear the effect of so important a step. It may be viewed as the last measure of an exhausted government, a cry for help, the government stretching forth its hands to Ethiopia instead of Ethiopia stretching forth her hands to the government. Okay, I apologize for the accent. I have no idea what Secretary of State Seward actually sounded like. All right, quickly, let's just break apart and digest Seward's quote, because I see how some of it can be a bit confusing, like when he says, our repeated reverses. What does that mean? Let me put it another way. Our repeated butt whoopings by the Confederates. Is that a little more clear for y'all? Another part that might deserve some clarifying is when Seward mentions Ethiopia. He's not talking about Ethiopia, y'all. He's using the word Ethiopia to symbolize Black America, both free and enslaved. Are y'all still with me? Just got to chin every few minutes just to make sure. Okay. So what Stewart was telling Lincoln at the time was that the optics were really bad at the moment to issue the Emancipation Proclamation because it would look like Northern whites were begging Black folks for help in saving them from losing to the Confederacy. I think that's clear enough. Seward wanted to wait for a win in the Civil War before issuing the proclamation. I looked over some of the records and found a period from August to September of 1862 where there were 13 battles fought, of which the Union only won 2. Just in case you're trying to do the math on this, I'll tell you, it wasn't looking so good for Old Abe and the Union. The win that this propaganda campaign needed so that it wouldn't look like the proclamation was a beggar's bowl held out by Lincoln came with the Confederate defeat at the Battle of Antietam. Lincoln's official issuance of the proclamation happened on January 1st of 1863. Oh, okay. And by the way, the proclamation only offered freedom to those enslaved in the treasonous states of the Confederacy. In the states that didn't secede, Delaware, Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland, well, they were allowed to maintain their institutions of slavery. It wasn't until the 13th Amendment that the actual issue of enslaving human beings was addressed politically. Oh, I just remembered something really funny. I hate taking detours. I apologize. Well, funny to me anyway. We all know that Lincoln's proclamation turned the tide of the war in favor of the Union. The Confederacy found itself back on its heels and being handed defeat after defeat after defeat by this new Union army that was now reinforced on the battlefields with highly motivated Black men. Guess what the Confederacy did? Okay, y'all are gonna love this. No one ever talks about this. So, January, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. March of that same year, the Confederacy passed a law. Sorry, I get a little. The Confederacy passed a law. I like to call it the Anti-Emancipation Proclamation. The Confederates issued a proclamation of their own, begging Black folks to come and fight on their side. Yes, they did. I can feel y'all shaking your heads in disbelief. But here's the kicker. This is how steeped in a parasitic white supremacist ideology they were. They issued this Anti-Emancipation Proclamation and specified that freedom was not on the table for any enslaved or formerly enslaved willing to come fight on their side. Once again, if you want to stop here, pause for a little reflection, I would not blame you. But I need to get back to my Lincoln Seward story. I want y'all to just take a moment to think about this. You're in a war. You are losing said war. You need help desperately. But instead of executing the steps that would get you where you want to be, you back off because of how it might make you look. The optics. Como se dice en español? Increíble. Okay, we're going to return to Galveston and the big lie in a second, but I want to make sure everyone understands that prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, Black people were already fighting and serving in the Civil War. It was not in any official governmental capacity, but you had men, women, and even children functioning as spies for the Union, teamsters, cooks, fortification builders, and yes, armed resistors. I really want to take a detour here and talk about the history of the contraband, but those escaped enslaved people who served the Union cause before the Emancipation Proclamation, but I've got to stay on track here. And so let's save that for another profile in history. You know, the bizarre thing for me in this moment is that none of this history is hidden. I've had heated conversations with many over some of this history, only to discover that the person I'm engaging has never even read the Emancipation Proclamation. What's that quote attributed to Marcus Aurelius? The and anyway, this is how it is. If you know how it's supposed to be, then placed between the pages of the book. Let's get back to Galveston. First things first. I want you to use your own common sense here when I point something out. Contemporary mythology wants you to believe that the enslaved people of Galveston were in the dark about things happening in the Civil War, and specifically the Emancipation Proclamation. Okay, common sense, people. Galveston is a port city. Please don't make me have to explain what that means. Secondly, okay, and I know most of you already know this, but Texas borders Louisiana. The Union captured New Orleans in 1862. There is so much more to be said about this, and I'm leaving so much on the table. The Union used their position in Louisiana to lead attacks into Texas. During the war, let me add something here. Enslaved people in Texas would flee enslavement, another form of resistance, cross Union lines, and lend themselves to the cause. This is.
I want to stop the video for a minute because I want to talk about something that I think people forget. And that is that Juneteenth, you know, when they hit the Emancipation Proclamation, General Order number 13 or number 3, you know, which freed slaves. But, and I say because there is a but, because like he says, there was 3 states. So slavery was still legal, even though, you know, June 19th is our day of, you know, emancipation and freedom and liberation. We have to this is why I say that to the Constitution, they had to add us in there. They had to include us in there because we weren't. And I don't think people fully understand that, because June 19th did mark the dawn of liberation. But let us not forget the toil and struggle that ensued for 162 days until the 13th Amendment was finally adopted on December 18th, 1865. Our journey towards freedom is etched in the scars of preservance, a testament of our resilience in the face of oppression. So, and even when we talk about CRT, I don't think people fully understand, because they always want to talk about it's a college course. That's not what I'm talking about, because if we're really talking about critical race theory, they teach that shit in school, because they're not teaching kids real history. They, you know, what's crazy is, this is the one thing that I will never understand, right? Is every time I see this debate on Twitter or people having this conversation, they never want to bring up, they always want to talk about, oh, it's some college course, blah, blah. Okay, here's my, and this is how I break down critical race theory, right? Because they're critical. I don't think people fully understand that. They tell a narrative about American history. It's to make one race look like angels and the other race like we weren't shit. Basically, and people are, well, why is it always got to be a black and white thing? What the fuck else is it supposed to be? Like, honestly. Let me ask that. Honestly, because you can literally, just like right now, I'm getting into it on Twitter. I can't even say I'm really getting into it. But it's like people will sit there and say about, because I say like this: if that cop was white, the Capitol officer, Michael Berg, was white, they wouldn't be talking about him and Ashley Babbitt. We wouldn't really. The only reason why they do is because he's black. How many people have seen that video that the guy is sitting in prison right now for? So yeah, we're gonna talk about race, because sometimes it is a black and white issue. I don't make it that way. That's not me. That's our political system. Don't get mad at me because I play y'all game, because that's the way y'all play it. Y'all always like to bring up race. So why can't I, to make my point, an example? Because that's what this is about. Even when you're trying to divide black people, because you want us to all be included. That's never gonna happen. It's not where it's not. You know, one thing that I realized, it's not going to be all sunflowers and roses and no, it's going to be some fucking tornadoes. It's going to be some winter storms. It's going to be some earthquakes. But if we all have understanding and love one another, we can get through that shit together. And I don't think people fully understood what this is, that, and that's what bothers me of when people try to take things and spin it without giving a full education about something. Because if we're going to talk about, especially for Juneteenth, if we're going to talk about RGB, if that's going to be these colors, then you got to explain why. Because that came after those, and people aren't going back in history and checking that shit, because you have to look. When did Marcus Garvey, and I will tell everybody will say 1920. When was Juneteenth? Let me actually play something real quick. It's just a short video anyways, and I already got it hammed up. So it's a short video, but it's a real video. So I don't know why. I don't think there's no sound. Oh wait, whoops. Let me go back. So no, I want people to watch. So this is a Juneteenth celebration in Texas. Oh damn, it still didn't add it to the stage. Oh damn. I don't think there's no sound. I'm gonna start it over again because obviously. But yes, this is, and what do you see at this Juneteenth celebration? It's red, white, and blue. And it's like, I feel like they don't want us to be proud of being Americans. They want us to feel like we aren't here, that we shouldn't be proud of where we come from. Because what do they always want to tell us? Go back to our country. Go back to your country. Go back to your country. I'm in my country. What do you mean go back to my country? I was born in Minnesota. I was born in a hospital that most politicians don't even know because they weren't here when it was here. Right? So that's what we have. That's why we don't have historical marks in Minnesota anymore. It's like, even in Red Wing, they I love the fact that they're finally talking about the barbershop in St. James Hotel in the equal rights meat market with Jeremiah Patterson. But if really messes me up is they don't talk about the property behind. They don't talk about the parking lot about the Salvation Army. The behind the stuff, right? Because there was a house there. There was a house that Julia B. Nelson owned, and it was a rooming house for blacks. But that's not there no more. And it always made me wonder, like, why are they so quick to get rid of Black history? Why? Why? Like, do you people really want us to really? It's even like, okay, here's another prime example. And the lynching in Red Wing in 1895. Why don't they ever want to discuss that? Why doesn't that ever come up at any type of, never comes up at Black History Month in Red Wing? Why is that? Why don't they talk about what happened on the railroad tracks by the river? Why don't they talk about what really went on down there? And how they scared African Americans, Black Americans, from coming to Red Wing. Right? And once you say why, what was going on? Because there was a strike. And they brought in the union brought in blacks from Chicago and Milwaukee to come here and work and see that. What do they call them when you cross the line? Or they call them scabs or whatever, right? So the union people that worked for the railroads didn't like that shit. So what did they do? They lynched a Red Wing resident. And there is articles written about it. It's just the fact that you can't Google this shit. So some history is it's easy to get rid of because it's so long ago. But it's called archived information. And if you go to the Goodhue County Historical Society, they have a little film thing you can look at and pull up the article. Because there was some written, and there's some even that was written that is at the Minnesota Historical Society of a black newspaper out of St. Paul. So, and here's the crazy thing of it is, Lucius out of Red Wing wrote this story. And people see, and that's the one crazy, most Red Wing people, because y'all ain't real Red Wingians, won't even know what I'm talking about, because there was two significant type of papers in Red Wing. And the one, so you had the one from Lucius Bullard, and then you had the one from Colville, William Colville, which you see the Republican Eagle. But them Republicans weren't, those were Democrats back in the day, right? Because William Colville was a racist, but yet they promote him in Red Wing. They don't, I swear, people looked up the book, 150 Uncertain Years of Black History of Black People in Red Wing. Look that book up and see how that long to go down to part of myself for the simple fact that I literally, when I was looking at William Colville because that's right there. Right there, and there's parks named after the bitch. All types of the same thing that Brooklyn Center is going through with Earl Brown. Yeah, and here's it's not to take away from their history, but let's not promote bigotness. Let's not promote racists and then not teach the full history about them. Let's tell the truth about them, that they were, maybe. Here's the thing of it is, because I understand, right? And I've understood for a very long time from my grandpa, because he never met a black person until he went to the army. So, and that's where I always wondered, like, why do they get that "not in my backyard" shit? Because there's such a stereotype, there's such a narrative about black people, right? Because if that's all you watch is the news and you've never had any type of interactions with black people in real life, you're gonna be like, oh man, you're gonna be scared. That's why I call it Negrophobia, right? Because they can be comfortable with some black people because they don't see them as black. They don't see them as black because it's okay for them to call me a nigger, but then they'll look at their black friend and be like, well, he's just a nigger. You're not like that. Wait, so, I finally caught on to that. Somebody made me see is they don't see them as black. They see them as whites and black skin. And I was like, damn, that's crazy. Don't be doing all that, dog. And he's like, no, how could you see it any other way if they want to say that they got black friends, but use the word nigger on just one person and make it make sense? I always wondered about that. That shit really made me really, 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 really think. But I understand it. Then I get it. Not everybody's educated. And at the end of the day, I don't find any disrespect in the word. I just want people to be educated and understand the harms that comes with that word. And we're never going to understand those harms if you have people that are out here trying to educate about it and they're not even from here. They can't understand of what that word means to our people, to our communities when they just got over here. And literally their own people, their own ethnicity groups like Nigerians or Somalians will sit there and call us niggers too, right? With the white people. They have their own names for us. That's what people don't want to talk about. That's what people don't want to talk about. They have a whole word for us. A whole word. A whole word. And then people will be like, well, so why do they call y'all just niggers and then them saying niggers? Make it make sense. Why you got to put the sand in front of it? Wouldn't they just be just a regular nigger? Why you got to put the sand in front of it? We don't be really going around and saying like that. We got cars. They was over there on camels and goats. I mean, we was too back in the day, but we have more cars than anything on the roads now. We ain't out there riding camels. So I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to be hateful. I'm just telling the truth. Is that if you even see a lot of the stories coming out of the Twin Cities with the kids, people just don't want to listen. They don't want to. They're so quick to group us all together, and that's not because they're their own individual people. They're not like us. And I don't even like Kendrick Lamar. I really don't. Don't like Drake either. Let me put that out there. But they're not like us. They can't understand our history. So why are we having people speak about Black American history, our Black American experience, and the experience that they're talking about, they can't feel, they can't understand because they can never walk it. Their ancestors don't know nothing about it. His lineage, their lineage, don't equal out to that. So why? And this is why we don't get reparations. Because if you look at a lot of these reparation task force, they're not Black Americans. You go down their lineage and they don't come back to off that slave ship. But y'all not ready for these conversations because they have you in your mind that the BIPOC, the person of color, instead of just calling you what you really are, a Black American. So, because it's crazy how you can just self-identify as African American now in Minnesota. Nobody wants to have that conversation. That's why I say these things that they're doing doesn't mean nothing. It's not for us. The Minnesota Migration Act, the African American Preservation Act, it's not for us when you literally can write in, when you can self-identify. Because there's a lot of people out there that can't self-identify as a Black American. They can't because the minute we come out of our house, we already are. We feel it. We feel it. And legislation is because of it. It has a big part to do with it. So before I get on too much of a ramble, let me go back to
how interesting this gets. Many of these formerly enslaved Texans, let's make sure to include Galveston here, who had family and loved ones still under the yoke of slavery, would return to fight or attempt to free their family and loved ones. There were thousands of Harriet Tubmans all doing the same thing to bring others to freedom. To really understand this dynamic of enslaved, formerly enslaved, and free Blacks forming resistance movements, we should put a lens on what became known as the Rio Grande Exposition. This gets almost no attention in our talks about the Civil War. What was so important about the Union's Rio Grande Expedition? 5 Black regiments occupied the area of Texas around modern-day Brownsville from 1863 to the end of the war in 1865. What was their mission? Well, exportation of cotton was financing the Confederacy's treason. These Black troops were sent to disrupt the cotton trade, and disrupt it they did. The landing of Black regiments in Texas near the Brownsville area scared the mess out of these white secessionist communities. Newspapers from that era tell stories of mass hysteria and whites fleeing Texas, leaving those they had enslaved behind, as well as most of their belongings. Once again, I'm only scratching the surface here, and I hope this encourages many of you to do the same or do your own research. Quickly, let me share a map with you to illustrate my point. Here's Brownsville on the Gulf near where these Union troops landed. This invasion, as the Confederates wanted to call it, sent shockwaves up through San Antonio, Houston, and as far away as Austin. Are we really to believe that this same panic didn't make its way up north to Galveston? It did. I assure you. I can also guarantee that everyone in Galveston was talking about this. Here's a quote from a Texas newspaper from that time, the Houston Tri-Weekly Telegraph. "We and the entire country in great excitement. The majority of planters have removed their Negroes towards the interior, and many families have left them all behind in fleeing from the perils of invasion." So, from 1863 to 1865, these Black soldiers were wreaking havoc on the Confederacy from this area of Southeast Texas. Hold on. Let me think about this for a second. 1863 to 1865. Okay, when did General Granger arrive in Galveston for his famous announcement to the enslaved folks? Yeah, I think that was about 1865. Okay, so wait, are we really supposed to believe that the Black folks in Galveston knew nothing about the war raging all around them, and they weren't being updated continuously while living in the area of a major port city? Please, let's give this lie the burial it deserves, and keep this in mind. Wherever, whenever people are suffering under any type of oppression, there will always, let me say this emphatically, there will always be resistance. And Galveston, the home of Juneteenth, was no exception, my friends. Another truth. There were Black Union troops marching through the streets and occupying Galveston days before Granger's arrival. You see where I'm going, right, with this, right? You see the theme here? So the big lie that we, African Americans, whether in Galveston or any other place in this nation, were not active in securing our own freedom is a destructive form of white supremacist propaganda and psychological warfare that is meant to marginalize and often erase our role in the founding and upliftment of this nation. I've even heard from the mouths of people who should know better. You know, Black folks fought on the side of the Confederacy also. Stop it.
Do you love boating? Well, Freedom Boat Club makes boating easy.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Makes sense.
Humanity. There's a saying, well, more of a proverb that says, "By opening their mouths, the ignorant are exposed." Okay. I didn't mean to venture down this path, but let me share something with y'all real quick.
I agree.
See this image? It's one of the images from the Civil War used in some schools, even today throughout the South, as proof that Blacks fought on the side of the Confederacy. Now, let me share the next image. Oh, wait. Are you telling me that someone cropped out the Union officers standing next to what are believed to be some of the earliest Black Union soldiers? Yes, yes, and yes.
Yeah.
But Baba, why would anyone cut out the Union officer from the original photo? I'll give y'all time to think about that. I need to bring this to a close. I have a couple of thoughts I'd like to leave you with. I have many white friends, colleagues, and associates who ask me if Juneteenth is for African Americans to celebrate only. I find this question a little unnerving. Almost no one questions Black folks celebrating Independence Day, the 4th of July, a period when many of our ancestors were enslaved.
Right.
I would put forth that Juneteenth is this nation's actual day of independence. It's the one day that everyone in this nation can point to as a time when this nation began putting into practice the lofty idealism of the freedom it espouses. And let me leave you with this thought. Please feel free to repeat it. Our African American ancestors freed themselves from the oppression of slavery and at the same time saved this nation from ruin. Thank you for your time and patience.
He definitely brought up some great points. And I got one more, but I'm not going to play the full thing. I'm only going to play for like 5 minutes of it. But this one I feel like is something that we definitely didn't learn, didn't really discuss. And I feel like, you know, a big thing that is out in the news right now is the fact of you hear about, you know, Byron Daniels or Donald's, the statement he made about black marriage during Jim Crow, which data does show. But Jim Crow era was fucked up. It was fucked up for black people. There's no doubt about that. But data and statistics shows that black marriage was up. Black marriage in that family unit was more of a normal. It's not like that anymore. And that's all people like to point out. I know everybody knows that the Jim Crow era was fucked up. There's no doubting that. There's no denying that. There's none of that. But certain things was better. And I don't think people really, if we want to look at it at times, I call that black excellence, because they had so many things that they were facing, but yet rose to the top. And I don't think they want us to get there with the Black Wall Streets, because here's my thing of it is, right? Why is there such a push? If that push was real to rebuild Black Wall Street, why hasn't it been done? Because we can send billions of dollars to countries for wars that affect us here that really shouldn't, right? Right? But we can't rebuild shit that y'all destroyed. Black neighborhoods. Wasn't that long ago. See, people choose to forget about Philly in the MOVE movement. I will never forget the fact that a police department bombed the black community. I will never forget that. I'll never let y'all forget that. I will never let that black mark, that black eye, ever. I will always bring that up. That was something that I would continually bring up. Like I said, I got one more, and let me play it and shut the hell up.
People don't realize that African Americans have always been a part of this nation's democracy. Black people always strongly desired the right to vote. They've always fought for being included in the political process. And then also, I think a lot of people might take for granted that African Americans always get to have that right, because we had it before and we lost it. And so, you know, presumably it could be lost again if people don't fight to protect it.
When we learn about the Reconstruction era in school, it's often taught as a dark period in American history, a time of upheaval and unrest right after the Civil War. But what often gets overlooked is that for a brief period of time, thousands of Black representatives were elected to office all over the South.
My estimate is that there were about 2,000 African American men who held public office during Reconstruction. Offices ranging from the Senate, there were 2 Black senators, 14 members of the House of Representatives, 600 or 700 members of state legislatures, and then dozens of other offices, state level, local level, etc.
So what was going on was that, first of all, a lot of the former Confederates, the most outspoken leaders of white supremacy, were not allowed to serve in Congress. And so, you know, with those people absent, there were people that did believe that African Americans should be folded into the fabric of American civil and political life, and that did advocate for Black people to be able to vote. And then, of course, when African Americans were prevented from voting, federal troops or federal investigators would often be called in order to protect those African Americans' rights in order to cast a ballot.
Most people have no clue that in 2023, the best way to make money on Amazon is not.
At the time, many states in the South were either majority Black or close to it. And because of that, they were able to elect Black legislators, especially at the state level.
The most significant accomplishment of Black legislators in many Southern states during Reconstruction was the establishment of public school systems, not only for African Americans, but for white students as well. And even though these were segregated, they were often the first time that many African Americans, fresh out of slavery, had an opportunity to learn to read and write.
The highest level of office reached by these Black legislators was the U.S. Senate, and the first was Hiram Revels, a U.S. Senator from the state of Mississippi.
So Hiram Revels was a pretty unique individual in that he was educated, and he later became a civil rights champion, before the Civil War. And then afterward, he was sent to Mississippi, where he was appointed by the state legislature to be a United States Senator. In response to Black political power and Reconstruction, the South was just rife with violence in every single Southern state. And the most obvious early example of that violence was the Ku Klux Klan, which did all sorts of different things, but attacked everything from school teachers, politicians, to farmers. And so these different waves of violence really popped up, especially during election days. And so in 1875 Mississippi, there was an organized overthrow, essentially, of the state Republican Party, which did include African Americans. There was violence at the polls in different cities, and that spread throughout the entire South. 1876, there was violence in different places like Florida and South Carolina and Louisiana that led to contested elections that ultimately paved the way for Reconstruction to end.
That overthrow was not put into law really until another generation, let's say around 1900, when Southern states figured out ways to abrogate the 15th Amendment, which had been enacted in Reconstruction to guarantee Black men's suffrage.
So once the 15th Amendment became law, Southern states couldn't disfranchise African Americans simply by saying Black people are no longer allowed to vote. And so in response to Reconstruction, in order to eliminate the Black vote, they had to come up with new ideas in order to make sure African Americans were taken off the voter rolls. And the most powerful of those methods was the literacy test, which allowed for local registrars in a county courthouse usually to look at a candidate and give the candidate a literacy test to see if they were qualified to register to vote. The nature of the test usually didn't matter. The person would just define whether they were qualified to vote based on whether they thought they were white or Black.
And so you had a period, from 1900 to the 1965, the Voting Rights Act, where very few African Americans were allowed to vote throughout the entire South. For a long, long time, Reconstruction was portrayed by scholars, but also by the teachers and the general public as sort of the lowest point in American history, a period of corruption, misgovernment, and this idea that Reconstruction was a disaster was part of the legitimation of the old Jim Crow South. The underlying message was the South was correct in taking away the right to vote from Black men, and that if Blacks were given the right to vote again, you just have another replay of the horrors of Reconstruction.
But I think one of the things in American history that we often teach is that there's a constant march toward things getting better. And it's a little bit tricky to teach Reconstruction because, African Americans during Reconstruction could vote in much of the South, and then things actually got a lot worse. And so it doesn't really fit into this narrative of constant progress throughout America since the Civil War. And so, in this day and age where we have numerous African American senators, just look at a place like Georgia where Raphael Warnock was elected, and white Georgians are largely trying to respond through tactics like voter suppression to tamp down the Black vote after the Black vote largely sent this African American man to the United States Senate.
After the 2020 elections, we saw historical voters of color turn out and a lot of first-time voters, even during a global pandemic. And after that, we saw Republican-controlled legislatures across the country drop hundreds of anti-voting bills. And so when we saw that collective activity happening, we had to go to the federal government and ask for protections.
Hillary Hawley works for Fair Fight Action, an organization working to fight voter suppression around the country. Though literacy tests remain a thing of the past, many states have enacted laws that purge voter rolls in ways that target minorities. or have made voting more difficult by closing polling places in largely Black areas. Fair Fight is now working to get legislation such as the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed in Congress to stop these tactics.
So he started working with Congress basically right out the gate in January 2021 to help ensure that the legislation was drafted in a way that could actually mitigate voter suppression and combat the real attacks that we're seeing in real time.
Even though today's laws might be a bit different, they're intended with the same, outcome in mind, to make it harder for Black people to vote, to make sure that African Americans don't have equal standing of one man, one vote in the democracy in order to ensure more white control over our political systems. I think it's important to learn about Reconstruction in American history because that was a moment, I think, where our democracy held the most promise for every single person, at least every single male in the history of the United States of America.
So, again, brings up some very good points that they don't teach, I feel like, in school. And things that should be talked about, because he did bring up some very good points about Reconstruction, and it would be very hard to combat. And I think that's why they don't teach it, because they don't want us to know. I don't think they want us to realize. And that's why I find it so hard with Republicans, because they don't even want to admit their wrongs, right? And they still do it today. And I think that's why it's going to be a weird election. And I want people to be aware, be cautious, because it's just starting. I know I didn't play no music today. I will tomorrow. I just really wanted to talk about something that meant a lot to me, because I love history, and I feel like people should want to learn history, because that's how when you know better, you do better. So, and I still believe in that. I still believe in the good in people, and I think that we need to talk about real history. We need to talk about truth in the history of our people. That's the only way that we will move forward, is the truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. And I stand by that. Just like let's talk about, I'm gonna leave out because I still got a couple minutes before I officially really need to be done. Reparations. The Bible talks about reparations, but they don't want y'all to know that. And this is how I know that people, these servants of the Lord, of who they say they're servants of God, then if you're a man of God, then let's talk about how God talks about reparations in the Bible. Let's talk about it. They don't want y'all to understand and know that. So go read James. Go read James, because you will see in the Bible that they talk about reparations. But you won't see them talking about that, because they don't believe, right? They're not paid to make y'all believe and to understand and to learn. No, because they want to keep that money for themselves so they can get their reparations. Remember that while they playing y'all. While y'all keep on paying them, so is the state. So is the cities. To oppress you. You're paying your oppressor. You're not giving your tidings to the Lord. You're paying your oppressor. I want people to think about that while people want to talk about, oh, you go to the strip club, blah, 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 whatever. So what? You're giving your money to the devil. God didn't tell nobody, why Kenneth Copeland need a whole fucking airport on his property? Or these people need to live in big mansions? Or churches need to have big old be as big as blocks? But yet we can't feed the house, the poor. Make it make sense. That's not God. That's fraud. That's not God's work. That's fraud's work. Because if it was God's work, those churches would be full of homeless people. They would be feeding the homeless people. So, y'all don't want to talk about that, though. Because you literally give your tidings, whatever they want to call them, you're giving them to the devil. That's what I'm literally calling Jerry McAfee, Pastor Ronnie, Patterson, where the fuck his name is, Brian Heron, Pastor Heron, Shiloh Temple Pastor, whatever his weird ass name is. A lot of the pastors in Minnesota and Minneapolis, y'all are the devil. Y'all are not giving out God's word or even doing God's work, because that's the work of fraud. Then I said what I said. Read it in the Bible, and I'll point it out because I do to Jerry all the time. If you don't believe me, go on Marcus X page. Go look at it. The interactions between Jerry and how he likes to point out the 7 deadly sins, but don't ever want to touch God's 10 commandments, because thou shalt not lie or steal. But what do? They lie and they steal. So I'm going to leave it at that, man. Y'all have a blessed Monday. Have a great Monday. And I'll see y'all tomorrow. Same time, same place. Win or fail, freedom or jail, heaven or hell. Wish me well. Y'all have a great one.
Urban conservative.